Unicorn soap. I want to make the coolest unicorn soap ever. I want frosting, I want pastels, and I want to make the craziest melt and pour unicorn horns you've ever seen.
But Chris, that's a tall order.
You think I didn't know that? I took a lot of risks with this soap and only one of them actually paid off. So join me, your bubble buddy Chris, as I set out to make some bars of magical unicorn soap. Any unicorn anything needs to be pastel, so for the bar, I'm going to do a pot swirl of pastel blue, yellow, pink, and white. Pastels are kind of tricky to pull off. It's surprisingly hard to control color in cold process soap, but we'll get to that later. On top, I'm going to pipe some velvety white unicorn fluff, which I'll dust with some opalescent biodegradable glitter. And lastly, I'm going to stick some twirly unicorn horns in there, and since I'm from the future and already made them, holy crap, I'm impressed with myself. I'm going to start with those first. To make unicorn horns, I have two options. The first is to make soap clay, which is time-consuming and finicky, and the second is to make a custom mold, which is time-consuming and finicky. So I'm gonna go with the latter. I've got some clumps of firm super sculpey clay, which I haven't touched in approximately 14 months. I also have my acrylic roller, which I decided I didn't need. Sorry. First things first, I need to warm the clay with my hands by playing around with it for a bit, and since the clay is firm, it's ever so demanding on my skin-covered twigs people like to call fingers. Once the clay is workable, I'm gonna roll 2 finger-length noodles that start thick and taper down to a sharp point. Starting from the pointy end, I entwine them and perform a tornado to get a nice twisty unicorn horn. I have my frosted crush soap here to gauge how big I want the horn to be, and if you have optic nerves, you can see that it's a bit mighty. 1 horn done, 5 more to go. Those twisty symbols of unicorn endowment take a trip to the Venus simulator to bake at 130°C or 275°F for 15 minutes, so they become nice and rigid. Now that they're baked, I can start fixing them into my British scented box using super glue. As I place them into the tapey cardboard monstrosity, which is to house the silicone casting solution, I realized 2 things. First, these horns have a slight curve to them, and getting curved things out of a mold is challenging to say the least. Second, this mold is deep, and the casting solution becomes pretty inflexible when it's cured, so I can already tell I'm in for a challenging time. Regardless, all of my horns are in there nice and sturdy, which means it's time to cast the mold. If you're a Soap Universe stan, you would have seen me use this most easy to use silicone to make the gumdrops for my holiday gingerbread soap. It's super easy to use, just mix equal parts of liquid aqua with liquid see-through and pour straight into the mold. I 1000% recommend it for creating molds, so I'll link that in the description. Those unicorn horns take a gooey bath, and you can see I place my mold in a more secure containment vessel because I don't trust my dinky tape tea box contraption to be sufficient. Clearly. 1 day later, the mold is ready to be unmolded to be used as a mold, and it seems we have a bit of a dam breach situation going on here, which I have my enviable taping skills to thank for. But the leak is the least of my worries because I need to find a way to release these clay horns from their silicone-y prison without destroying the mold. The clay casts are still a bit slick from the molding material, so they're impossible to grip onto. But I found if I twisted the horns in the direction of their spiral, then I was able to remove them with relative ease. And they leave behind a pretty neat hole. In the end, removing them took about 20 minutes, and my fingertips were numb and all wrinkly from my body trying to find a way to grip onto the horns. They were pretty nasty suckers to remove. And you know what reality I was trying not to face as I pushed on with this embed project? Melt and pour soap does not exactly tolerate being manhandled. So, subscribe. Out comes my trusty melt and pour soap base, the clear no sweat variety, and I throw the last of the little chunk of it into the microwave to meltify. Once it's converted to liquid, I'm going to sprinkle in a bit of titanium dioxide to make it white and opaque. TD is notorious for clumping, so I only added what I needed and made sure to blend for a hot minute. My soapy milk mixture gets poured into those little spiral tubes of soon-to-be regret. And then I give those unicorn horns a nice tender 40-minute nap. Once they solidify, I attempt to remove one and that came out so easy. Fooled you, I just cut out the agonizing 5 minutes where I had to gently pry it out with my fingers. but holy cow, was it ever worth it. Look at how good it looks. Now I just gotta rinse and repeat ×5, taking great care not to break any horns. Well, the last 2 horns won the battle, being completely destroyed in the process, and then there were 4. Finally, I'm gonna give these unicorn horns a bit of a glow up by dusting them with a bit of my Holiday Glow Up Super Sparkle White Diamonds mica. I would have preferred to use an opalescent mica for this powdering, but I think this over-the-top super sparkly mica gives the horns a really attractive sheen that almost makes them look wet. With the embeds conquered, the time has come to face the unicorn soap and the risks that are to come. Since this soap is dominantly pastel, I'm going to throw some titanium dioxide directly into my main batch and frosting batch, 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon respectively. For my pastel rainbow, I'm going in with an 1/8 teaspoon each of Buttercup Yellow, Neon Hot Pink Kisses, and In the Tropics, which will give us a nice color palette. And look at how pretty my spoon looks. Those powders take an oily bath and get spun with my swirly twirly until I count it to an arbitrary number in my head. Once they're uniform, I'm ready to unicorn. By the way, who coined the term unicorn? Who sat down and thought,
Oh yeah, this magical horse with a whimsical twirly horn? Vegetable.
The first thing I'll do is prepare my frosting, because I've learned that standing around waiting for frosting to thicken is surprisingly painful. Bringing it to trace beforehand should give it enough time to reach that lovely buttery texture. Something I vehemently detest about these tiny batches is the splashage. If the blender catches a teaspoon of air, it burps it up and sprays soap everywhere, which makes an already stressful hobby just a little more sweat-inducing. That gets set aside to become butter, which means it's time to start the actual unicorn soap. Now, just to be a happy camper, I'm not impressed with the shade of white. Remember, I added a tablespoon of titanium dioxide to this, which should have been enough, but since I'm using a brand of olive oil that's very rich in color, it was a risk I took that didn't pay off. Granted, I could have just added more TD, but why? Simple solutions are for anything with a brain. Moving forward, I've got to tell you about my fragrance selection because I have the whole class here today. We have strawberry, sweet orange, snowberries, and crisp apple. I wanted something fruity, slightly sweet, slightly musky, with a bit of a mysterious edge. Now, I've used strawberries before, and it's a bit of a separator, which is why my batter develops this applesaucy sort of texture. Yes, strawberries was another risk, and I'll just leave you in suspense. I'm gonna quarter my batter, which means 150 grams get scooped into 4 different containers. I was hoping to attempt the pot swirl with much thinner batter so all the colors could get a chance to blend together a bit, but I worry the integrity of this batter is stretched thin enough with that strawberry fragrance. It literally gets chunkier by the second. My primaries form the Venn diagram, which is my soap batter, and then I mixify.
Colors? Where did you go? Where'd you go?
Okay, well, I have 2 olive greens and I think the most lovely creamy peach color I've ever invented, to be honest. Okay, take 2, the colors are fine, except look at my white batter. It's literally more yellow than my yellow batter. Literally nothing I do is helping, which is why I'm just gonna acquiesce and dump everything together, and hey, that kinda looks cool. Since the batter is a bit pudding forward, I'm gonna give it a little swirl to get those colors mingling, because otherwise they'll just be blobs, and a unicorn ain't be having that. This loaf gets 1 good solid pour, and you can really see that grainy texture coming through. It actually kinda looks like forage porridge that a real unicorn would consume, does it not? That pudding gets jiggled to level it off and gets put aside to become baneful butter. Let's check on that frosting. This consistency is perfection. It's nice and buttery, like the praise I like to give to those I need something from, JK. I've secured a Wilton 1M tip to my piping bag, which will give my frosting that opulent, roughly extrusion that literally... I ran out of breath. That literally every bakery with a sidewalk has been doing since cavemen existed. Using the leftover colors I dyed my soap with earlier, I'm using a popsicle stick to line the inside of the bag with those rich colors. I want the frosting to be predominantly white with random tints of color. Now, the safe way of doing this would be to split the soap batter into 4, color the batter separately, and then combine them all in the piping bag. But you know what? No great stories are told without conflict, and I'm the #1 New York Times bestseller here. You know, when it's all in the bag, it looks really pretty. Like, this has to turn out pretty, right? Well, that's what I thought thought too. At first, it just came out white and I was like, cool, just fill out the middle and the colors will eventually come. The colors never came. I mean, bravo for that breath of blue there on the ruffles, but I wanted something a little more. On a positive note, I'm really impressed with the volume of this piping. This frosting is absolutely the perfect piping consistency and it was a delight to work with. For final touches, I'm going to big glitter the top with some super sparkle white diamonds, which was impossible to control because I had a fan on, which was facing the opposite direction I'll add, but it somehow matrixed the air around the walls and into my soap, which means most of my glitter went on the table. I also have some Simply Stardust, and if that's not the perfect description for everything around us, then I don't know what is. It has a bit of an opalescent, pearly, pinky blue sheen, which will help ground those colors I used inside the bar. Lastly, it's time for the horns. And just no comment. They speak for themselves. Tap Magical Unicorn Soap of relentless obstacles get some shaky B-roll camera footage where I thought I was recording when I wasn't and was actually recording when I was transitioning between all the shots, so welcome to my apartment. A 4th day later, and my unicorn soap is ready to cut. Look at how beautifully little it changed. There's no soda ash, no discoloration, the horny bits are still there. The top of the soap is really building up the inside. So I'm gonna be bold and unmold. It's actually not bad at all, especially the bottom where you can really see those colors folding over each other. It's not quite what I pictured, but I kinda dig. There's a particular cosmetic imperfection I'll discuss in the product shots, but right now I have some unicorns to slay. This soap was a real time sink, but I don't regret it one bit. Even though I'm underwhelmed by the purity of the white, which was giving 1970s color of the decade, I actually kinda like the chaotic squished layers of pastels, and I'm absolutely in love with those unicorn horns. They're the reason I made this soap, and I'm so happy with how they turned out. Because of the separation the strawberry fragrance caused, there's some strange transparency going on in those pink and yellow layers. It almost looks like it could be glycerin rivers, but I'm not 100% certain. Some people like glycerin rivers, but in this context, they're a little distracting to me. Speaking of strawberry fragrance, I'm not in love with the fragrance blend I made. I wanted to use up some of my fragrances, which means my selection was slightly limited. My logic was, oh, fruity, just combine all the fruits. And that was a bit of a bust. The strawberry smell completely vanished, and it smells predominantly like an apple skin. Not apple per se, but like the skin of the apple, where you sit there spending 5 minutes chewing and it's like, okay, am I allowed to swallow now? I don't know if that makes sense or not, I'm a little tired. I decided to give the soap a corny name and call it Unicorny, because realistically, it's got what I wanted from the beginning. Pastels? Check. Frosting? Check. The best melt and pour unicorn horns hands down? Check, 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 check. This soap was an exercise in patience, and despite getting the better of me in some areas, it gets a solid B from me. This unicorn gets no scorn. That was a journey with the soap universe. Thank you for watching. Bubble bye.